All Cooper CPAs, located in the heart of East Nashville, offer a wide variety of tax services for individuals and businesses. Contact them at 615-257-0646 and visit their website, allcooper.com, for a full list of services.
Well, hello, everybody. Coming up next on Political Soup with Crom Carmichael, we're going to have an update for you on the Affordable Health Care Act. Violence raging, not a big surprise when you consider where. And some new twists to getting a car loan. And did you pay your internet tax this week? All that and more. Coming up next on Political Soup.
Bandwidth for today's show is brought to you by SoftLayer.com. We love SoftLayer here at Talkapolis. They are the greatest hosting company ever. They make everything easy. Check out their website at SoftLayer.com. Thanks again for sponsoring the show.
Talkapolis, the social media TV network for your city.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to this edition of Political Soup. I'm Joe Williams with the man, Crom Carmichael. You see, I have my one note card. You see, Crom has all the information.
You got all these papers.
That's, but it goes with exactly. I want to go back to the very first show. What you've taught me from the start, and that's knowledge, understanding, leads to wisdom.
There you go. You got it. And that's everything we're talking about today. We're going to talk first about the facts. And a lot of what we're talking about today, frankly, is follow-ups to what we've talked about before.
Right.
That's kind of the nature of public policy, or when it works or when the shortcomings. And then we'll talk about what the implications are. So that's where we are.
Apparently, some folks think I owe a few people an apology because last week or the week before, I got a little excited during our discussion of Obamacare, made the comment, if it's that doggone good, you folks who voted for it or even were in the group, maybe you voted against it, but you're in Congress, you need to live with it too. And I had some of my liberal friends tell me that I owed some folks in Washington an apology. Crom, I'm not so sure I do anymore.
Well, it's fascinating because what happened was there was this movement on the part of Democrats to actually try to pass legislation so that they didn't have to comply. Because, see, legislation was passed, I don't know whether it was 10 or 15 years ago, but there was legislation passed that says that if the Congress passes a bill that imposes something on the American people, that they have to live by the same law. And so the Democrats have started trying to push a bill through Congress giving them an exemption on Obamacare because it wasn't particularly clear in the bill that did pass. And Republicans got wind of that, and so Republicans are now saying, by golly, we're going to pass legislation that absolutely requires that members of Congress, their staffs, and the people in the administration, I understand, including the president and the vice president, have to live under Obamacare.
Yeah, I got to be honest, I guess that's my big confusion is why legislation was passed 10 or 15 years ago. I go back to the issue of common sense. You're talking about wisdom, and I talk a lot about common sense. And how in this country do you not have your leaders live under the same thing they're making you live under? Why did it take legislation to do that? And why would anybody try to attempt to legislate against it now?
Well, Joe, all right, I'm going to answer your first question first, and that is that Congress regularly exempted themselves from laws. For example, Congress exempted themselves from the minimum wage law.
Right.
Congress exempted themselves from the sexual harassment laws, Title IX laws, discrimination, all these different laws because they didn't want to be subject to lawsuit.
Okay.
And so they set themselves apart. They set themselves literally above the law. And now, so that then when the Republicans took over in '94, one of the planks in their 10 deals was to write a law and bring it up for a vote. And they wrote it and brought it up for vote, and it passed. There were 3 things in that I can't remember I remember there were 10 things in the promise.
Right.
There were 3 things that were brought up for a vote that failed. The 10 promises weren't that we would enact legislation for these 10 things, but we would vote on these 10 things.
Right.
One of the ones that they did vote on and passed was a requirement that Congress live under the same laws that they passed for the rest of us. But the Democrats know that Obamacare is a terrible piece of legislation, and it is. And now we're beginning to see more and more Democrats. You have Max Backus, who came out and said it's a train wreck. Here's one, and this is very interesting. This is a quote from a person who is running for Congress for a special election. This is the Democrat speaking during the debate with the Republican. Obamacare is extremely problematic. It is expensive. It is $500 billion higher cost than we originally anticipated. It is cutting into Medicare benefits, and it is having companies lay off their employees because they are worried about the cost of it. That is extremely problematic, and it needs an enormous fix. Now, that's a Democrat who is standing before the voters, trying to win votes.
Well, he's not going to do well, is he?
What's a she?
She's not going to do well.
Yeah, her name is Elizabeth Bush.
She's a Democrat. She's in trouble already.
B-U-S-C-H.
I don't care.
C-H.
She's in trouble already.
But anyway, she's running. And so, Democrats are now recognizing that as Obamacare gets implemented, people will find that it has enormous flaws. It's running up the cost of insurance. The coverage is not good in the standpoint that getting coverage is very, very hard. And doctors are not going to take Obamacare patients if they are paid at the same rate as Medicaid. And so it's a disaster, and as the Democrats are now saying, it's a train wreck.
Well, I was going to say, why did they not see that earlier? Of course, it was a 2,200-page bill.
Well, and what did Pelosi say?
Yeah.
We have to vote for it to find out what's in it. So the answer to your question is they didn't know how bad it was until after they'd passed it.
Well, that's kind of like, Aaron Maddox was saying earlier, it's like buying baseball cards in a pack. Did I get a good one or not?
At least you know they're baseball cards.
I was going to say, at least you know they're baseball cards.
So at any rate, so it's going to be a mess, and the people will see that. And I think the midterm elections, you've got a lot of Democrats now who are announcing they're not running again. Max Backus just recently announced he's not going to run again. I don't remember, Jay Rockefeller has already announced.
Wow.
Has already announced in West Virginia he's not running again. So there's 3 or 4 Democrat seats in very, very red states who have announced they're not going to run. And so unless Republicans nominate somebody like that foolish fellow from Missouri or the one from Indiana, Murdoch, or I don't remember the guy, Aiken, unless they nominate really poor candidates, then Republicans will start picking up Senate seats.
Understanding that each of these seats have to be dealt with on an individual basis, but a name like Jay Rockefeller, et cetera, do you think these are situations where they're just ready to retire, they're ready to quit, or do you think they always want to know that they won their last election?
I think it's a combination, Joe. I mean, Jay Rockefeller is not a spring chicken.
Yeah.
Max Backus has been in the Senate, I think it's either 36 years or 30. Okay. This would have either been his 6th term or his 7th.
Wow.
And so I think it's a combination of the two. But frankly, I think there are also some Democrats who are not flaming leftists who recognize that Obamacare is a disaster, and they don't want to be around either for the election, and even if they won, they don't want to be around to take the heat, because this is not a partisan thing. When you pass legislation that says there's no way for an insurance company to put a cap on lifetime expenditures, and you cannot discriminate based on pre-existing conditions, those two things alone will cause insurance rates to go up. Now then the question is, do they go up 15% or do they go up 50%? To be honest with you, and this is, once again, let's get back to the knowledge, the understanding, and the wisdom. Think about this for a second. If you have $1 million lifetime cap, an insurance company can, across a broad pool of insureds, can say, okay, this is how much this is the number who might end up at $1 million. They can figure out how to insure that. But if there's no lifetime cap, it could be $5 or $10 million
or more.
And then multiply that times a number of people. They have no way of. I mean, they have to raise their rates dramatically in order to ensure that. Then, if you take out the pre-existing conditions, the other thing is Obamacare is going to absolutely nail young people, because it also says that there has to be community ratings, which means if you've got an older person who smokes and is obese, that the younger person is going to pay the same premium as that person, even though the younger person runs, eats well, takes care of him or herself. But yet the premium has to be the same regardless, and that is just foolish.
Well, wait a minute. Now, there's a trade-off to that. Because the 50-year-old who smokes and doesn't eat well and is obese, just pick on me, you know, all they're doing is protecting that young one's Social Security. It's a trade-off. You know, they'll get it back on the back end.
Yeah, nice try.
Well,
Nice try. So anyway, when you put all that in the mix, the Democrats in Congress know that it's going to be a mess, and that's why they were trying to exempt themselves. And I actually applaud the Republicans for saying, no, we're going to live under this law, and by golly, it'll be so bad, we'll all want to change it.
I was going to say, I will go as far as to give a shout out to Representative Dave Camp, who is the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee. Pretty powerful little group there.
You bet.
Who is pushing this legislation to make sure Congress and the executive branch, the legislative branch, everybody falls under the same rules as the American people. And I give him a shout out because that's exactly what I called for last week.
Yeah. And he was listening. He must listen to our show.
He's got Talkapolis somewhere on his. Probably, you know, he's sitting there and he think he's go doing a meeting, and he's actually got his little smartphone there, and he's watching and listening as he sits.
Vanity is a big thing.
Boy, it is, isn't it? Wow, we better take our break now so we can kind of pump our heads back down. When we come back, violence. Yep, you know we talk about it. And there's violence all over the world. You're going to be surprised. We'll be back in just a second.
All in Cooper CPAs, located in the heart of East Nashville, offer a wide variety of tax services for individuals and businesses. Contact them at 615-257-0646 and visit their website, allcooper.com, for a full list of services.
And welcome back, everybody, to Political Soup. Crom Carmichael, Joe Williams, having a big time. Crom, you get information from around the world. And I'm sure that you are aware of one city yesterday, just terrible outbreak of violence. 23 people shot, three murdered.
God, was that in Baghdad?
No, sir, that was in Chicago, Illinois.
No.
Chicago, Illinois yesterday.
Chicago? Oh, my God.
Victims included a 10-year-old child who police say was apparently not the intended target. 10-year-old kid. Chicago police called it, a big outbreak after they posted so much more as far as their improvement in the crime rate. Yesterday in Chicago, 20 people wounded, 3 killed. One in front of the University of Chicago and Illinois police station.
Did they get the perp, or did he get away?
Apparently, we don't know for sure, but they didn't say anyone was arrested.
Well, did they give a reason for this outbreak of shooting?
Well, that's what's so doggone funny, because one of the things that the article, which is a nationally known, pretty legitimate news service, says. Police are saying that it was the first 80-plus degree day of the year.
So they're blaming it on global warming.
Well, the heat. Yeah, the heat in Chicago got them. It got up, they got up to 80 degrees, so they started coming out. What I'm trying to figure out is if 23 people were shot, Crom.
When it's 80 degrees.
Yeah, when it's 80 degrees. But if 23 people got shot, that means that somewhere there are 23 illegal guns on the streets of Chicago, because everybody knows you can't get a permit. And, the first sign of sweat.
Now they have Chicago.
Here it comes out.
Chicago has some of the most restrictive handgun laws in the country. Now, let's break this thing down. First of all, I want to restate or state again what the Second Amendment says, and then we're going to get to that from there to here.
Okay.
It says, a well-regulated militia being necessary for a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That's what it says. So let's be clear. The Second Amendment is truly about protecting yourself against government, oppressive government, tyranny. Now, just as if you're going to define a ball, your definition has to include something shaped like a football, which is not round.
Correct.
And so the right to protect yourself against a criminal is a subset of the right to protect yourself against the government.
Right.
What the liberals refuse to do is acknowledge that the Second Amendment is primarily designed for the people to protect themselves against their own government. Now, having said that, let's move over to this. Chicago has a policy about guns. that doesn't work. The amount of violence in Chicago, and this is tragic, but this is not news because it happens every week in Chicago. There are more people, I don't know if there are more people killed in Chicago a year than in Baghdad, which is why we kind of had a little fun with that, but the number is amazing. Now, in New York, which used to have terrible gun violence, under Giuliani, they implemented stop and frisk. And the amount of gun violence in New York has dropped, I mean, like 85, 90%. It's a safe city. The liberals say, we'll do anything to stop gun violence. No, they won't. What they're really saying is, we want to take guns away from the law-abiding citizens because they are opposing stop and frisk.
Well, New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg earlier this week got in a little bit of a twist with the folks in Chicago. He took their statistics on how they had improved, and there were only 300 or 400 something murders last year. Long story short, whatever the number was. So he or someone in his group tweets out, gee, if that had been New York, instead of having 280, we'd have had 1,400 and something murders. Chicago was not real pleased with him.
Well, Chicago's Obama's hometown.
This is the community he organized.
This is the community he organized, and so what you have is you have a solution for Chicago, and it's called stop and frisk. What is so fascinating is Rahm Emanuel refuses to implement a policy to save lives, and we know it saves lives because New York and Chicago are both big metropolitan areas, and gun violence in New York under Dinkins was a mess. I mean, it was a war zone. And so they implemented a policy that took gun violence down by really getting the criminals off the street, which forced the criminals to not carry their guns. Chicago could do the same thing. Now, as an aside, I just want to point out that since I brought up...
Global warming is what, that's what caused this.
Global warming. Here we have, from Bloomberg, speaking of Bloomberg, from Bloomberg we have headlines, Iraq said to halt Al Jazeera's license. Now...
What?
Now, Al Jazeera is the network that bought Al Gore's network, Current.
Yeah, exactly.
They are now expanding their footprint and their presence all across the United States.
Right.
I say that only because this is an Islamic network that a lot of their programming includes a lot of jihadism. And the public, especially our mainstream media, you would think they're the three monkeys. They've got their eyes covered, they got their ears covered, and not going to say a word. But the public needs to know that even Iraq, a Muslim country, is shutting down Al Jazeera because it is inflaming the population. So, folks, get ready because Al Jazeera, we can blame Al Gore for Al Jazeera.
I like that.
Yeah, in the U.S. and it's gonna be profoundly bad for the country.
But he discovered the internet, so.
And made $100 million. By selling out the country.
I probably need to apologize. That's a couple of shots that really weren't necessary.
Yes, they were.
Okay, then thank you. I'll take your word for it.
You bet they were.
But absolutely amazing, some of the things that we find. A couple of other things we've got coming up as we wrap up this edition of Political Soup. And part of them even got me kind of fired up. Nobody would believe that.
Okay.
We'll come back and tell you what's happening next on Political Soup.
Bandwidth for today's show is brought to you by SoftLayer.com. We love SoftLayer here at Talkapolis. They are the greatest hosting company ever. They make everything easy. Check out their website at SoftLayer.com. Thanks again for sponsoring the show.
Welcome back, everybody, to Political Soup. The man, the myth, the legend. From Carmichael, I'm Joe Williams. One of the things we talked about before we went on the air is, and I've been thinking about it as we've been sitting here. I remember the first major purchase I ever made was a car. I had to get a car loan.
Okay.
And I remember it because my employment got vetted, my down payment, where it came from, got vetted, and came within a whisper of having to have a cosigner.
Okay.
And this is with 30% cash down.
Okay.
On a used car, no less.
We're getting
but
deeper.
It's kind of an old thing. But I remember how difficult it was, and quite frankly, At that time, car loans were 8, 9, 10%, and yeah, I was paying 15, 16.
Okay.
I was a risk.
Okay.
Young guy, single, you know. It's a whole lot easier now, and I'll bet it'll be getting easier.
Well, I'm not going to say easier necessarily, but the story that's here is about the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and
Who do they answer to?
No one. No one. It's the guy that's in charge is part of Dodd-Frank.
Oh, great.
It was passed under Dodd-Frank,
Okay.
and it is supposed to protect consumers from financial institutions who do bad things. Now,
Okay.
let's go back and look at the history of car lending. And when I say the history, I'm talking about the part as it applies to this story.
Okay.
If you the Congress passed a law that said that car lenders, whether they're a bank, whether they're the captive finance company of Ford, General Motors, Chrysler, whatever, or a consumer finance company, that they could not ask questions of race or gender.
Okay,
'Cause
I'm okay with that.
They could not discriminate. It had to be a straight up
Yeah.
credit score.
What's the score? Give me the number.
What's the credit score?
What's the risk?
If somebody has really good credit, then they're going to get a really low rate.
Right.
If somebody's got really bad credit, they might get a really high rate. But it's going to be based on their credit score.
Right.
And so the financial institutions that loaned money have historically loaned money based on the credit scores. Now, by the way, when the poop hit the fan in the housing market, it did not hit the fan in the car market.
No.
Because people did not have a right to get a car loan that they couldn't qualify for.
Right.
Like they could a house loan.
Right.
All right. So along comes the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and they can't get Congress now to pass a law saying we now want you to ask for the gender and the race and all these other things. They can't do that. So now what they're doing is they're trying to tell the lenders that they have to guess whether or not the person who's trying to borrow money is a female or a minority. And if they are a female or minority, they're trying to impose legislation or a ruling through their regulatory strength. They're trying to make lenders then grant people who are minorities or women a lower interest rate than their score would otherwise indicate. In other words, reverse discrimination. But here's how silly it is. If your name is Jefferson and you're from the Bronx, then I guess the finance company's supposed to say, well, maybe that person's black. But if your name is Jefferson and you live in Kansas, is that person black? Or what if the first name is Taylor? Taylor. Is that a male or is that a female? You're supposed to guess. And this is just how stupid it is. You know, if you're going to sequester money, close this sucker down.
Yeah.
This is actually taking a very well-functioning market and trying to wreck it.
Well, you know, again, this is where we come back to what I call unintended consequences, in that the idea of having a group, but they got to answer to somebody, but having a group that will protect the consumer, I'm okay with this. This doesn't sound like protecting the consumer. This sounds like it's almost
It's politics.
Well, not only politics, but it's a negative towards the business.
Well, it is. They don't care. What they want to do is they want to be able to tell women and blacks and Hispanics that they're looking out for them. But this isn't going to help women, blacks, and Hispanics get car loans. This is going to actually make it more difficult for
They'll
them.
get out. Yeah, these folks will get out of the business. I just don't want to do car loans anymore.
Sure. And so, but this is an example of doing something that's going to raise the cost of doing business for a properly functioning industry. And we know it was properly functioning because it actually went through the downturn without having to get a bunch of government money.
Well, wait a minute now. They got cash for clunkers. And we talked about that the other week and what a disastrous program that has turned out to be in the long run.
Yeah. But that didn't have anything to do with this. That was just a stupid program to try to help accelerate car sales by about 90 days.
Yeah.
Which it did that.
It did that.
But it also had a lot of, now there's where you get into your unintended consequences. But by the way, they weren't unpredictable consequences.
Oh, I agree with that.
Okay, but a lot of people who pass the legislation go, well, I didn't ever think that it would do that. And that's because they shield their eyes and their thinking from the consequences of their actions.
I never thought my dog would bite my fingers when I gave him that piece of bacon either, but guess what?
Guess what?
You know, we had the Band-Aid.
So anyway, so that's that one, and that, we'll follow it as it goes along. these rules have not been implemented yet. There'll be some pushback. Hopefully, they will get thrown in the trash can.
The other thing in the automotive industry that worries me somewhat now, and this is kind of off the topic we were headed, when years ago when we started financing automobiles, it was 24, 36 months, went to 48. I remember when they went to 60. There's at least one player, manufacturer, who is now willing to finance a new car, for 120 months, a 10-year note on an automobile. And I guess the thing, being as old as I am now and having been upside down and made some stupid mistakes when I was young, that's a stupid mistake if you're young. You're not going to get out of it as easily as I did on the 4-year and the 5-year deal. But that's crazy. 10 years to pay on an automobile?
Do you remember what the manufacturer is? Mm-hmm. Who is it?
No.
You're not going to say? Okay. All right. Well.
Let's put it like this.
Let me put it this way.
It's not one that's based in the United States.
Well, let me say this. There are cars, some cars. I drive a car that is now 5 years old. Mm-hmm. I know for a fact. Well, I know that I'll be driving it for at least 5 more years, and it will run beautifully. It was an expensive car when I bought it. But I bought it because I planned to drive it for a long, long time.
Then let me qualify my point then. This is a manufacturer whose past history says 3-4 years.
Okay, well then
you're right. I mean,
they're setting themselves up for a real problem.
As a consumer, you're killing yourself.
Yeah.
But as a consumer, at least up front you pay the taxes on it and you're done. Now, if you want to buy the car on the internet, you can get out of paying the taxes on it.
What a segue.
You like that?
Well, I don't know that you can.
On
the car you can't, because when you come back to your home state and license,
that's true. You got to get a tag. That's true.
Then you're going to pay the sales tax.
That's true. But, on the whole, Tennessee's a great example. And I've never done this. I've never purchased anything from the internet.
I don't know anybody who admits to purchasing something on the internet and not paying their proper taxes.
But technically, at the end of the year,
yeah,
you're supposed to figure up how much you spent and then figure up what portion you owe the state in sales tax.
Right.
There's even a push now that you're getting ready to talk about that I think is funny in the state of Tennessee. It's being pushed by Amazon.com, of all people, who just got an agreement with the state not to collect sales taxes.
Oh, did they really?
Yes, they did.
That's funny.
That is funny. That's funny.
But
all that could be changing.
Well, there's a bill, and it may have passed the Senate. In fact, I think it did. 74 senators voted to make retailers of over, I think, $1 million in sales. Yeah, here it is. It would force online retailers with $1 million or more in annual sales to collect and remit sales taxes, state and local sales taxes.
Okay, so that protects the, quote, small business.
Yes,
okay.
Yes. The ones that, yes. And
for the moment.
Yeah, well, yes, that's true. And so at any rate, though, but what's interesting, this article says there are 9,646 different tax jurisdictions.
You know what this is about? This is not a tax bill. This is a revenue bill. This is a job-generating endeavor.
Yeah. For all the software companies that'll create
software
and try to administer.
And the support, because now that, think about what it'll do for the folks who have the telephone lines to India.
Yeah,
call for support.
Well, now let's remember this. There are a lot of the sales that are made on the internet today are taxed. For example, if you have Nexus, which means a location in a state,
right,
you have to collect sales tax whether somebody buys from your physical location or buys from the internet.
Okay.
So let's use Walmart just as an example.
Okay.
They have stores probably in every state. So if I'm in Tennessee and I buy something from Walmart.com, they're going to charge me the sales tax. They're going to collect it and pay it. And so there's a lot of that going on now. The biggest one that this is going to affect, and the one that is so much against it, is eBay.
Sure.
Because there are a lot of players on eBay who are small businesses who buy through eBay. And so eBay will end up having to disentangle, frankly, their whole business model so that these small retailers who set up shop on eBay and sell $100,000 worth of stuff don't have to try to collect and administer a jurisdiction. If they wanted to do this, and Art Laffer wrote a column about this, and he actually came out in favor of a tax on the internet, on internet sales, but said you need to make it a single tax per state. Now you got 50 taxes to keep up with. That's reasonable. But right now, the Senate bill didn't include that. And by the way, I'm not saying that I necessarily support what Art Laffer supports, but this is ridiculous. When it gets over to the House, you're going to have a lot of small business people who are talking to their House members, because here's what they're concerned about: that $1 million becomes 500,000.
Exactly.
And the 500,000 becomes 250,000, then 100,000, and the next thing you know, they're out of business because they can't keep up with the administration. And you got tax authorities from all the different states just beating and banging on them and sending them invoices for taxes.
Well, you'll wind up with small businesses who at some point spend more than their gross revenue just trying to meet the requirement on the taxes.
Exactly. And when a state sends you a letter and says, how much were your sales in my state, and you've got to break it down by jurisdiction, and small businesses don't have the ability to do that.
Right.
So this is going to slow down in the House, but for all of our viewers, they need to be aware that this is out there, and if they have a strong opinion about it, they ought to let their elected representatives know.
Single rate by state makes sense, because no matter where you buy something in the state of Tennessee, all the sales tax that is collected goes to the state, and then they divvy it back to the individual communities.
Yeah, so if you're going to do it, that's the way to do it.
That's the way to do it. Well, speaking of the way to do it, I think we've done it well today.
It was a good show. I
We're
enjoyed
done.
it. I enjoyed it.
You going to get to be at home some this week, or are you going to be traveling again?
Little travel. I'll be in and out for the next couple of weeks, but we'll be reading and coming up with articles for our next little visit together.
Why do I have the feeling you're going to be looking at some properties, specifically 18 pieces in a tight configuration? You're going to be out playing golf.
No, actually, no. I won't be able to do that in the next
that
week.
stinks.
Yeah, it is. That does.
That's what I used to tell them. I'd leave the office. I'd say, I've got to go look at some property. Where? I said, I got 18 spots. Sometimes it worked.
That's right.
Sometimes it didn't.
Yeah.
Crom Carmichael, thank you so much for today. It's been a good one. Thank you so much for being with us. We are so proud that you come out and join us here on Political Soup. Please keep watching. Until next time, I'm Joe Williams for Crom Carmichael, and this has been Political Soup.